narrative.
The sound of her laughter still echoes in my mind. Not the kind, warm laughter I fell in love with years ago, but the cruel, mocking kind that has become all too familiar in our marriage. I never thought I'd be sitting in the passenger seat of our SUV, driving toward a couple's retreat that cost 3 months of savings, all because I couldn't remember the last time we had a conversation that didn't end with me feeling worthless. The fighting had become routine over the past 2 years. Small disagreements escalating into her tearing down everything about me, my career choices, my physique, and recently, the most intimate aspects of my manhood. It started with subtle jabs, growing increasingly public and humiliating. Last month at her company dinner, she made a joke about my shortcomings that left her colleagues awkwardly avoiding eye contact with me for the rest of the evening. "You're being too sensitive," she would say whenever I confronted her. "It's just a joke. Don't you have thicker skin than that?" But the pain in my chest each time suggested otherwise. Each comment chipped away at whatever confidence I had left. The man she married, ambitious, self-assured, passionate, was fading away, replaced by someone who second-guessed every decision, every word. The GPS announced our exit was approaching. The retreat center was nestled in the mountains, a 3-hour drive from the suburban life we'd built together. The brochure promised transformative experiences and renewed intimate connections through innovative therapy techniques. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew something needed to change. "Did you remember to pack my hiking boots?" she asked, breaking the tense silence that had filled the car since our argument that morning about leaving late. "Yes, they're in the blue duffel," I replied, keeping my eyes on the winding road ahead. I had triple-checked everything before loading the car, knowing any forgotten item would become ammunition. The retreat center appeared as we rounded the bend, a sprawling wooden lodge with floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the surrounding pines. Several couples were already unloading their luggage, some laughing together, others maintaining the same tense distance I felt in our vehicle. "Well, it's certainly isolated," she remarked. "A whole week trapped here. Hope you're ready to actually participate this time." I bit back a response, remembering our therapist's advice about choosing battles wisely. This retreat was my last-ditch effort to save what remained of our marriage. 7 days of intensive couples therapy, outdoor activities, and structured conversations designed to rebuild intimacy. The knot in my stomach tightened as I considered the possibility of more public humiliation among strangers. As I pulled into a parking space, I noticed a woman greeting arriving couples. Something about her presence, confident yet warm, caught my attention. She moved between the guests with ease, her clipboard tucked under one arm as she offered firm handshakes and genuine smiles. "That must be the lead therapist," I said, more to myself than to my wife. "Well, let's hope she's better than the last one who couldn't see how unreasonable you were being about everything." I took a deep breath and turned off the engine. The mountain air hit my lungs as I stepped out, crisp, clean, invigorating. For just a moment, I allowed myself to hope that perhaps this place, this week, these professionals could help us find our way back to each other. Or at the very least, help me find my way back to myself. The lead therapist turned as we approached, her eyes, piercing and perceptive, meeting mine. She extended her hand. "Welcome to New Beginnings Retreat. I'm the senior relationship counselor here. You must be the couple from registration group C." My wife stepped forward, turning on the charm she reserved for important people. "Yes, that's us. We've heard wonderful things about your program." The therapist's gaze lingered on me for a moment longer than seemed normal, her expression suggesting she'd already observed something meaningful in our brief interaction. I couldn't help but wonder what she saw, another failing marriage, or perhaps something more specific about the dynamic between us. "The welcome session begins in 30 minutes in the main hall," she said, her voice carrying a gentle authority. "Until then, feel free to settle into your cabin. Your information packets are waiting inside." As we walked toward our assigned cabin, I caught her watching us, making notes on her clipboard. Something about her attentiveness made me nervous, yet oddly comforted. Someone was finally paying attention, really paying attention, to what was happening between us. I just hoped I was prepared for whatever truths this week would reveal. The main hall buzzed with nervous energy as 12 couples sat in a circle of plush chairs. Our welcome packets contained the week's schedule, ground rules, and a series of questionnaires we'd complete throughout our stay. I thumbed through the papers while my wife chatted with the couple beside us, a businessman and his much younger partner who seemed equally uncomfortable. "Let's begin by introducing ourselves," the lead therapist announced, commanding attention instantly. "I'll be guiding your journey this week, alongside my colleagues." She gestured to two other professionals seated across the circle. "Our goal isn't to fix anyone, but to create space for honest communication and renewed connection." As couples introduced themselves, I noticed patterns emerging. The overly enthusiastic pairs trying too hard to seem perfect, the openly hostile ones who couldn't get through an introduction without contradicting each other, and the quiet, defeated ones who barely made eye contact. I wondered where we fell on this spectrum of brokenness. When our turn came, my wife squeezed my hand, a public display of affection that felt jarring after months of cold distance. "We've been married for 7 years, she began with practiced charm. "We're here because we've lost our spark and need to reconnect." Her sanitized version of our problems made me shift uncomfortably. The lead therapist's eyes met mine, as if sensing the unspoken reality. "And what are you hoping to gain from this retreat specifically?" she asked me directly. Before I could answer, my wife jumped in. "He needs to rediscover his confidence. He's become so passive lately, it's affecting everything." She laughed lightly. "Sometimes I feel like I married a lion, and now I'm living with a house cat." Several men in the circle chuckled awkwardly, while their partners shot them knowing looks. Heat crept up my neck as the familiar shame washed over me. "I'd still like to hear from you," the therapist persisted, keeping her focus on me despite my wife's interruption. I cleared my throat. "I want to learn how to be heard," I said simply, surprised by my own honesty. The therapist nodded thoughtfully. "That's a good place to start." Our first exercise involved splitting into separate rooms, men with the male counselor, women with the female assistant. The lead therapist floated between groups, observing. In our circle, men reluctantly shared frustrations that mirrored my own, feeling undervalued, misunderstood, or emasculated. "Society tells us to be vulnerable, then punishes us when we are," one man said bitterly. Murmurs of agreement rippled through our group. When the lead therapist entered our room, the energy shifted subtly. She leaned against the wall, listening intently as each man spoke. When my turn came, I described the constant criticism without mentioning the specific intimate humiliations. "It sounds like your self-worth has become dependent on your partner's approval," she observed. "Isn't that normal in a marriage?" I asked. "Interdependence is healthy. Emotional subjugation is not." Her words hit with precision. Your value exists independent of her recognition of it. When the groups rejoined for dinner, the atmosphere had changed. Some couples sat closer, others maintained careful distance. My wife was unusually quiet, picking at her salmon while avoiding eye contact. "What did you talk about in your session?" I asked, attempting conversation. "Nothing important. Just venting about annoying husband habits." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "What about you? Did you all complain about your demanding wives?" "We talked about communication patterns," I replied, not taking the bait. "The importance of speaking without judgment." She snorted. "Did they give you a backbone implant while they were at it?" I set down my fork, suddenly tired. "I'm trying here. This whole retreat was my idea, remember?" "Yes, another expensive solution instead of just being the man I married." The lead therapist passed our table just as my wife's comment landed. She paused imperceptibly, her expression neutral, yet somehow knowing. "How's dinner, folks? Don't forget we have our evening visualization exercise at 8. After she moved on, my wife leaned forward. "She seems to take a special interest in our conversations." "She's doing her job," I replied, though I'd noticed it too, a particular attentiveness that felt different from how she interacted with other couples. The evening exercise involved writing letters to our younger selves at the beginning of our relationships. As I penned warnings to that hopeful, confident version of me, I felt the lead therapist's presence behind my chair. She leaned down slightly, reading my words. "Interesting insight," she whispered. "Maybe tomorrow we should schedule an individual session. Sometimes we need to understand ourselves before we can be understood by others." I nodded, surprised by both the suggestion and the flicker of anticipation it sparked within me. For the first time since arriving, I felt something beyond resignation, a tentative hope that someone might actually see me, not just the diminished version of myself I'd become in this marriage. As she walked away, I noticed my wife watching our interaction. Her eyes narrowed with an expression I couldn't quite place, but recognized as dangerous. Morning light filtered through pine trees as I made my way to the small office for my individual session. My wife had been surprisingly supportive of the idea, which only heightened my suspicion. "Go ahead," she'd said over breakfast. "Maybe they can fix whatever's going on with you." Her words carried their usual sting, but I was growing numb to them. The lead therapist greeted me at her door, motioning toward a comfortable armchair across from her desk. The office was warm and inviting. Bookshelves lined with psychology texts, large windows overlooking the mountains, and notably absent of the typical therapist's couch. "I appreciate you making time for this," I said, settling into the chair. "I make time when I see someone ready for meaningful change," she replied, sitting across from me. Yesterday's exercises revealed patterns I think we should explore. For the next hour, we discussed my life before marriage, my confidence in my career, my self-assured approach to relationships, my optimistic outlook. Then came the methodical excavation of how that changed. The therapist took notes occasionally, but mostly maintained eye contact that felt both uncomfortable and necessary. "When did you first notice yourself becoming smaller in your marriage?" she asked. The question caught me off guard with its accuracy. Smaller. That's exactly how it feels. That's what emotional diminishment does. We shrink to accommodate another's need for space or control. I described the early years, subtle criticisms that seemed constructive at first, jokes at my expense that I laughed off to seem easygoing, gradual isolation from friends who weren't good enough, according to my wife. "And the more intimate criticisms?" she asked carefully. "When did those begin?" He crept up my neck. "About 2 years ago, after a work promotion, mine, not hers." Interesting timing. Success often triggers insecurity in partners with control issues. I hadn't considered this perspective before. I thought she'd be happy for me. "Sometimes what appears as contempt is actually fear," she said. Your success threatened the power dynamic she'd established. We moved deeper into uncomfortable territory, the bedroom criticisms, the public humiliations, the systematic dismantling of my confidence. "What you're describing is emotional abuse," she said matter-of-factly. "No judgment, no surprise, just clear recognition." "Men can't be abused," I said automatically, repeating what I'd heard countless times. That's precisely the cultural narrative that keeps many men trapped in damaging relationships. Her voice softened. "The psychological impact is no less real because of your gender." Something broke open inside me, a dam holding back years of confusion and pain. I hadn't cried in front of another person since my father's funeral 8 years ago, but tears came now, quiet but unstoppable. She waited patiently, offering tissues without comment. When I regained composure, she leaned forward slightly. "I noticed something about you that perhaps you've forgotten," she said. "You possess tremendous emotional intelligence and resilience. The fact that you initiated this retreat, that you're sitting here now doing this difficult work, these aren't the actions of a weak person." Her words landed like rain on parched soil. I couldn't remember the last time someone had seen strength in me rather than deficiency. What your wife mocks as inadequacy, I see as thoughtfulness. What she frames as weakness, I recognize as empathy. She glanced at her notes. "Your colleagues must value these qualities in your leadership." "How did you know I'm in a leadership position?" "You mentioned your promotion, but more than that. You speak like someone accustomed to considering multiple perspectives. That's rare and valuable." Our session ended with practical strategies for setting boundaries, techniques for responding to public humiliation, phrases to interrupt negative patterns, permission to prioritize my emotional well-being. "I'd like to observe your interactions more closely during group exercises," she said as I prepared to leave. "With your permission, of course." "That would be helpful," I replied, surprised by how much lighter I felt after just one conversation. As I reached for the door, she spoke again. "One more thing. The retreat has a confidentiality policy. What we discuss stays between us unless you choose to share it." I nodded gratefully, knowing my wife would interrogate me about the session. Returning to our cabin, I found my wife waiting, her posture tense. "Well, how was your private therapy?" The emphasis suggested impropriety. "Helpful," I said simply, using one of my newly learned techniques. "We identified some communication patterns to work on." "Did she tell you on the problem?" "That seems to be her specialty with the husbands here." Her tone was accusatory. Actually, we focused entirely on my responses, not on you at all. This wasn't entirely true, but it deflected the conversation. My wife seemed dissatisfied with this answer, but couldn't find an angle of attack. The group trust exercise starts in 20 minutes, she said finally. Try not to embarrass us. Walking to the main hall, I replayed the therapist's words about strength and emotional intelligence. For the first time in years, I considered the possibility that the problem wasn't my inadequacy but the relationship's toxicity. The revelation was both terrifying and liberating, like discovering a door in a room I believed had no exit. I wasn't sure yet if I would walk through it, but knowing it existed changed everything. The afternoon trust exercise was designed to expose vulnerabilities. Couples sat facing each other while answering increasingly personal questions provided by the therapists. Each pair was spaced far enough apart for privacy, but the energy in the room remained palpable as emotional revelations rippled through the group. Some couples clasped hands in solidarity. Others maintained careful distance. My wife and I sat cross-legged on meditation cushions, knees almost touching but not quite. The lead therapist circulated among the couples, occasionally pausing to observe or offer guidance. When she approached our area, I noticed my wife straightening her posture, adjusting her voice to sound more engaged and affectionate. Remember, the therapist addressed the entire group. This exercise isn't about performance or saying what you think your partner wants to hear. It's about authentic communication, perhaps expressing things you've never said aloud before. My wife smiled tightly. We've always been good at honesty, haven't we? The irony wasn't lost on me, but I nodded anyway. The first few questions were manageable, discussing early impressions, favorite shared memories, moments of pride in one another. My wife excelled at this performance, recounting stories that painted our relationship in glowing terms while the therapist was within earshot. Then came the more challenging prompts. Share something about yourself that you feel shame about, something your partner may not fully understand. The card trembled slightly in my hand as I read it aloud. My wife went first, describing work insecurities that seemed calculated to appear vulnerable while actually highlighting her accomplishments. When my turn came, I hesitated, weighing how honest to be. I feel shame about how much I've changed, I finally said. About how I've allowed myself to become diminished in our relationship. Her eyes narrowed. What does that even mean? It means I used to trust my own judgment, to feel confident in my decisions and myself. Now I second-guess everything. She scoffed. So I'm to blame for your insecurity? I noticed the lead therapist pausing nearby, pretending to adjust something in her notes while clearly listening. I'm not assigning blame, I said carefully. I'm answering the question about my shame, that I haven't stood up for myself when I should have. Stand up against what? Me supporting you. Me pushing you to be better. Her voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby couples. The next card asked about unfulfilled needs in the relationship. I braced myself as my wife took her turn. I need a partner who isn't so fragile, she began, her voice carrying further than necessary. Someone who doesn't wilt under the slightest criticism. Someone who acts like a man in all areas of life. She emphasized the last words with a pointed look that made her meaning unmistakable. Heat crawled up my neck as several nearby participants shifted uncomfortably, clearly overhearing. The lead therapist stopped pretending not to listen, watching our interaction with intent focus. Your response seems to contain criticism rather than expressing your own needs, the therapist observed, stepping closer. Can you try rephrasing in terms of what you genuinely need? My wife's smile didn't reach her eyes. I need physical and emotional strength from my partner. Is that better phrased? Perhaps, the therapist replied, though strength manifests in many ways beyond the conventional. After my wife's display, it would have been easy to retreat into safe answers, but something in me had shifted. I need respect, I said simply. Not just publicly, but privately. I need to feel valued rather than constantly measured and found wanting. My wife rolled her eyes. This is exactly. Please allow him to finish, the therapist interjected firmly. I need to be seen as a full person, not just a collection of perceived shortcomings, I continued, surprised by my own steady voice. And I need acknowledgement that manhood isn't defined by arbitrary standards or physical attributes. The therapist nodded encouragingly. That's a profound need. to be accepted in your wholeness rather than reduced to parts or performances. My wife's face flushed with anger. So now you're taking his side? I thought therapists were supposed to be neutral. Supporting someone's expression of genuine needs isn't taking sides, the therapist replied calmly. It's facilitating honest communication, which is precisely my role. The tension between them was unmistakable. My wife excused herself shortly after, claiming a headache that required rest in our cabin. As other couples continued the exercise, the therapist approached me. That took courage, she said quietly. It didn't feel like courage. It felt like desperation. The two often coexist. She checked her watch. We have an outdoor activity scheduled next, but if you'd prefer some time to process what just happened, that's perfectly reasonable. Actually, I could use the distraction, I admitted. The group activity involved a nature walk focused on mindfulness, with couples deliberately separated to encourage individual reflection. As we gathered by the trailhead, I noticed the lead therapist organizing the hiking order, strategically placing me in her own group while my wife was assigned to her colleague's supervision. During the walk, she kept our conversation professional, but occasionally offered observations that felt personal in their insight. Notice how much clearer everything appears when you're not viewing it through someone else's expectations, she said as we paused at a vista point. After dinner, which my wife skipped entirely, the evening ended with a guided meditation. As participants dispersed toward their cabins afterward, the lead therapist caught up with me in the lobby. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her professional tone softened by genuine concern. "Better than expected," I admitted, though returning to the cabin feels like walking into a storm. She nodded understanding. Sometimes the most important growth happens in the eye of that storm. She hesitated, then reached for her phone. "I don't normally do this with participants, but given the intensity of your situation." She handed me her phone with a new contact page open. "My professional number. If things escalate tonight, text me. Just for this week, while you're under our care." As I entered my information, our fingers brushed briefly, an innocent contact that nonetheless felt significant. She took her phone back with a reassuring smile. "Thank you," I said, meaning it for more than just the number. "You're doing important work here," she replied. "More than your wife realizes." What neither of us noticed was my wife watching from the darkened hallway, her expression hardening as she observed our exchange. The cabin was dark when I returned, save for a small lamp in the corner. My wife sat in the shadows, her silhouette rigid with tension. I braced myself for the confrontation I knew was coming. "Enjoy your private conversation with our therapist." Her voice dripped with accusation. She was checking in after what happened during the exercise, I explained calmly, using the grounding techniques I'd been practicing. Her job is to support participants through difficult moments. Is exchanging phone numbers part of that professional support? She rose from the chair, arms crossed. "Don't insult my intelligence. I saw you." The old me would have stammered excuses, apologized unnecessarily, tried desperately to defuse her anger. Instead, I set my water bottle on the table and met her gaze directly. She gave me her professional contact in case things escalated tonight. "Given how you left the session, it was a reasonable precaution. So I'm dangerous now? The villain in your sad little victim story." She laughed bitterly. "You've completely charmed her with this wounded routine, haven't you?" Rather than defending myself, I asked a question that had been forming since our therapy session. "Why did you marry me if you find me so disappointing?" The directness of my question caught her off guard. She blinked, momentarily silent. "You weren't like this before," she finally said, her voice softer but still accusatory. "You were confident, ambitious, took charge. Now you're so hesitant about everything." "I wonder why that might be," I said quietly. She paced the small cabin, agitation visible in every movement. "My father warned me that men change after marriage. Said you'd show your true colors eventually." This revelation clicked something into place. Her father, a domineering man who treated his wife like an accessory and openly belittled her in family gatherings. The man who had never approved of me despite my attempts to earn his respect. "Is that what this is about? You're afraid I'll become like your father if you don't keep me under control." Her expression confirmed my theory before she could deny it. "This is ridiculous. You're twisting things to avoid responsibility." "I'm not avoiding anything. I'm trying to understand what happened to us." I gestured between us. "We used to be a team. Now it feels like I'm your project, a disappointing one at that." If you'd just be more decisive, more assertive, more like your father? I finished for her. She flinched as if I'd struck her. I am nothing like him. Aren't you? The constant criticism, the public humiliation, the control. For the first time since I could remember, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Not fear of me, but fear of the truth in my words. She sank onto the bed, the anger temporarily displaced by something more vulnerable. I don't want to be like him, she whispered. In that moment, I felt a flicker of compassion for her, for the little girl who grew up watching her mother diminished, who vowed never to be in that position herself. It didn't excuse her behavior, but it helped me understand it. We've both lost ourselves in this dynamic, I said, sitting across from her. You're so afraid of being controlled that you became the controller. A tear slipped down her cheek, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her in months. For a brief moment, I glimpsed the woman I'd fallen in love with, beneath layers of defensive armor. Maybe this retreat wasn't a mistake after all, she said softly. Maybe we needed to see what we've become. We talked late into the night, truly talked, without the usual power struggles and defensiveness. She admitted to insecurities I'd never suspected, fears that had driven her cruel behavior. I acknowledged how my conflict avoidance had enabled the toxic pattern. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it felt like the first honest conversation we'd had in years. The next morning brought the retreat's most challenging event, the mirror exercise, where partners shared perceived strengths and weaknesses while facing each other in front of the group. Given our breakthrough the previous night, I approached it with cautious optimism. My wife seemed subdued but present as we took our places in the circle. When her turn came to share my strengths, she surprised me with genuine acknowledgments about my compassion and integrity. But when discussing weaknesses, old patterns emerged. You need to be more assertive in all areas, she said, with a pointed look that made her meaning clear to everyone. Despite our conversation, she couldn't resist the public opportunity to remind me, and everyone else, of my supposed inadequacies. I noticed the lead therapist watching intently, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes communicating something I couldn't quite interpret. When my turn came, I focused on constructive observations about our communication patterns rather than personal attacks, earning an approving nod from the therapist. After the session ended, participants broke for lunch. My wife joined a group heading to the dining hall while I stayed behind to help stack chairs. The lead therapist approached as the room emptied. That was professionally handled, she said, especially given the circumstances. We actually had a breakthrough last night, I admitted, though it didn't fully translate to today's session. Real change takes time. One conversation doesn't immediately override established patterns. She hesitated, then added, sometimes what feels like progress is actually just a tactical retreat. Her warning resonated with something I'd felt but couldn't articulate, a sense that my wife's vulnerability might have been strategic rather than genuine. I have another individual session available this afternoon if you'd like to discuss it further, she offered. I'd appreciate that, I replied, genuinely grateful for the support. As she updated her schedule on her tablet, she glanced up with an expression that seemed to cross professional boundaries, just for a moment. You know, in another context. She didn't finish the thought, but she didn't need to. The implication hung between us, neither acknowledged nor denied. I should catch up with my wife, I said, though I made no immediate move to leave. Of course. She tucked her tablet under her arm. Oh, and I never got your number last night. For my records, purely professional, of course. As I recited my number, watching her enter it into her phone, I realized we were engaged in a delicate dance around something neither of us was prepared to name. When she looked up again, her professional demeanor had returned, but something in her eyes suggested that our connection transcended the therapist-client relationship. 3 o'clock, then, she confirmed, turning away with a smile that contained multitudes. I headed toward the dining hall, my mind spinning with conflicting emotions. For the first time in years, I felt seen and valued, not just as a project to be fixed, but as a person worthy of respect. The fact that it came from someone other than my wife was both troubling and exhilarating. The afternoon session with the lead therapist never happened. As I approached her office, my wife intercepted me in the hallway, her eyes bright with an emotion I couldn't immediately identify. There you are, she said, linking her arm through mine with unusual affection. I've been looking everywhere. The hiking group is leaving in 10 minutes. I thought we could join together. Her sudden enthusiasm felt jarring after the morning's tension. I actually have an individual session scheduled, I explained. Cancel it, she insisted, tightening her grip on my arm. This retreat is about us reconnecting, not you spending more time alone with the therapist. The emphasis she placed on alone carried clear implications. Before I could respond, the therapist emerged from her office, taking in the scene with a quick, perceptive glance. Is everything all right? She asked, her professional tone belied by the concern in her eyes. My wife's smile didn't reach her eyes. Perfectly fine. I was just telling my husband that we should join the hiking group. As a couple. She turned to me. Isn't that right, dear? The endearment sounded foreign after months of cold formality between us. I looked between the two women, caught in a power struggle that was ostensibly about a hike, but clearly about much more. We did schedule a session. The therapist reminded me gently. But it's entirely your choice. My wife's fingers dug into my arm. The session can wait. Some fresh air will do us both good. Something in her demeanor, a controlled desperation beneath the facade of conjugal harmony, made me acquiesce. Let's reschedule for tomorrow, I told the therapist. She nodded, her expression carefully neutral. Of course, my door remains open if you need anything. The meaningful look we exchanged didn't go unnoticed by my wife, whose artificial smile tightened further. The hike itself was beautiful but tense. My wife maintained physical contact throughout, holding my hand on easier terrain, clutching my arm during steeper sections, making sure every other couple noticed our apparent closeness. Her conversation felt scripted, peppered with inside jokes and fond reminiscences for the benefit of our audience. Remember our honeymoon hike in Colorado? She asked loudly as we reached a scenic overlook. You were so attentive, always making sure I had water, taking all those photos of me at the summits. I did remember, and also remembered how she'd criticized my photography skills afterward, dismissing most of the pictures as unflattering. As other couples dispersed to enjoy the view, she pulled me aside, her cheerful mask dropping momentarily. What's going on between you and her? She demanded in a harsh whisper. Nothing inappropriate, I answered truthfully. Don't lie to me. I've seen how she looks at you, how eager you are for your sessions. Her fingers dug into my wrist. You're making us look ridiculous. I'm not the one putting on a performance, I replied calmly, gently extracting my arm from her grip. And I'm not lying. She's been professional but supportive. She wants you, my wife hissed. It's pathetically obvious. And you're eating it up. The attention, the validation. She laughed coldly. Does it make you feel like more of a man, having her fawn over you? The irony wasn't lost on me. My wife, who had systematically undermined my confidence for years, now concerned about another woman building it back up. This isn't about her, I said quietly. It's about us, about how we've been treating each other. Her expression hardened. So this is my fault. I push you to be better, and instead of stepping up, you go looking for someone who'll coddle your ego. The familiar pattern of blame and deflection would normally have sent me retreating into apologetic submission. Instead, I held my ground. No one's coddling anything. For the first time in years, I'm being treated with basic respect. The fact that it feels so foreign is the problem. Her face flushed with anger or shame, perhaps both. Before she could respond, another couple approached, commenting on the view. My wife instantly transformed, leaning into me affectionately while engaging them in animated conversation. The remainder of the hike followed this pattern: performative closeness in public, seething accusations in private. By the time we returned to the lodge, emotional exhaustion had settled over me like a heavy fog. Dinner that evening was a group affair in the main hall. My wife excused herself early, citing a headache, leaving me alone at our table. I was finishing my coffee when the lead therapist approached, sliding into the empty seat across from me. Your wife seemed distressed during the hike, she observed. She's feeling threatened, I admitted. By you specifically. The therapist considered this. And how do you feel about that? Confused. Conflicted. I stared into my empty cup. Part of me is relieved to have someone see what's been happening. Another part feels guilty, like I'm betraying her by even talking about it. That's a common response to long-term emotional manipulation, she said gently. The guilt isn't yours to carry, but they make sure you do anyway. Our conversation drifted to life beyond the retreat. Neutral topics that nonetheless revealed compatible worldviews, shared interests, similar values. For 20 minutes, I experienced what ordinary, respectful adult interaction felt like again. No walking on eggshells, no bracing for the next criticism. As we prepared to leave the dining hall, she placed a hand briefly on mine. About tomorrow's rescheduled session. Yes, I'll be there, I assured her. Actually, I wanted to suggest we meet off-site, she said. There's a coffee shop in town, about 15 minutes away. Sometimes a change of environment helps participants speak more freely, away from the retreat setting. The invitation hovered between professional and personal, a liminal space that could be interpreted either way. That sounds helpful, I replied carefully. What time? I have a break at 11. I could text you the address. Her eyes met mine with unmistakable meaning. Before I could respond, a voice came from behind us. Texting patients now? Is that standard practice for therapists these days? My wife stood there, her headache apparently forgotten, arms crossed defensively across her chest. The therapist maintained her composure. As I mentioned during orientation, we provide various communication channels for participants who need support between sessions. How thoughtful, my wife replied acidly. And do all participants receive such personalized attention, or just the attractive ones? The therapist rose smoothly. I'll leave you two to talk. Remember, tomorrow's group session starts at 9. As she walked away, my wife turned her fury on me. This is humiliating. Everyone can see what's happening. Something in me finally broke. The dam of patience, forbearance, and conflict avoidance that had defined our relationship. What exactly is happening? I asked, my voice calm but firm. A professional is treating me with basic respect and dignity. And somehow that's threatening to you. She's flirting with you, she hissed. It's completely inappropriate. Maybe she is, I acknowledged. But what's more telling is how shocking it is to me. That simple kindness and interest feels so foreign that I barely recognize it. My wife's expression faltered momentarily before hardening again. So this is my fault. I'm the villain because I don't shower you with empty compliments. No, I said quietly. You're not a villain. You're a hurt person who hurt me in return. But I can't keep paying for whatever happened before we met. Around us, the dining hall had emptied, leaving just the echo of our confrontation in the cavernous space. What are you saying? She demanded. I'm saying I deserve better than constant criticism and public humiliation. If that can't come from our marriage, then maybe the marriage has run its course. Her face paled. You'd leave me? For her. This isn't about her, I repeated, realizing as I said it that it was true. It's about finally recognizing what I've allowed to happen and deciding it stops now. I walked away then, not toward the therapist's office, but toward our cabin to pack my things. Whatever happened next, whether reconciliation or separation, would happen on different terms. The balance of power had shifted, not because another woman had expressed interest, but because I had finally recognized my own worth. As I reached the cabin door, my phone buzzed with a text message. The therapist's name appeared on my screen, along with a simple message. Whatever you decide, remember, your worth isn't measured by anyone else's perception of you. I smiled at the irony, that someone I barely knew could see what my partner of 7 years had missed. That true manhood had nothing to do with dominance or physical attributes, and everything to do with integrity, compassion, and self-respect. Qualities I was finally reclaiming, one difficult conversation at a time.
Our story has come to an end. If you've made it this far, how about subscribing to our channel? It helps us immensely. I've selected 2 other videos for you that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Feel free to click on them. I'll be waiting for you in the next story. See you soon.